Well, good morning. Thank you all for getting up and braving the nice weather in Kansas City coming. Hopefully there's something here that we can help you improve your situation as you go through the process. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on my CTP activities today, and I think modeling and everything else is tied to that, but just, kind of that'll be the focus, and we'll go from there. One of the first things I'd like to do is make a little revision to my bio. Maybe even a confession. I was born in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. So what that means is from now on, every February 2nd, you can all tell somebody you now know somebody that was in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania when we make national news. All right? And then after the presentation, hopefully that'll be the day that you go back and you remember something that I told you today that you can focus on about, hey, I remember where that was and I know who told me about it. So hopefully you'll tie those two things together. I'm not sure how serious you can take me after you recognize that I grew up in a town that the guys wear top hats to promenade a groundhog around. But at the same time, I think there is a serious tie to Punxsutawney and floodplains. Just like a lot of other small towns, it has a floodplain through the middle of it. Guess who lived in that floodplain? Guess who learned in 1972, I think that was Agnes, I can't remember now, there's been so many, like that the levee system that the Corps of Engineers built after the Johnstown flood did not protect our town. All right, but fortunately the good news is our house was elevated and, we survived with minimal damage. Obviously this is before a floodplain program was really eminent and there was no venting, so that basement that we had was filled up with water, or a swimming pool, as some of our local people in Region 3 like to call that stuff, okay? So fast forward 25 years later, I'm now a state coordinator with an attitude about flooding, okay? On the mapping side, let's shift to that. In 2006, MapMod came along, and we rushed, like a lot of everybody, to the table to get our products, moving out of the paper world. There were some communities in Maryland that were CTPs directly with FEMA, and they got digital conversions. We were not interested in that. We wanted to move to something a little bit more robust. Fortunately, the state had a LiDAR plan, had already collected LiDAR data for sea level rise. There's 24 counties in Maryland, 17 of them abut the Chesapeake Bay or the Atlantic Ocean. So sea level rise is prominent, and that gave us a really good head start on topo for mapping. With that being the starting point, we then decided we wanted to replace those digital models, the detailed models, and we even wanted to take a stab at creating A-zone models as we went through the process. So that was the FEMA side, but as Larry read my bio, I also have like 2 or 3 other hats, and one of those is on the state permitting side. So we wanted to combine those two things on a day-to-day activity so that they didn't continue on in these two diverse paths. All right, so let's go back to 2006 when that modeling stuff was getting started. How sophisticated was your cell phone? Because that's about the time that we got started in this process. I had a flip phone. I think I still work with people that still carry them, but that's where we were on technology as we were going through that process. Well, that meant when we wanted to start the process with LiDAR, you had to get information out of in the field for the culverts and bridges, all right? So culvert data meant you had to take a survey crew, or you had to take a GPS equipment, a camera, and a whole bunch of information to collect just that bridge opening, and then spend a lot of time packaging that stuff back together as you went through the process. That was painful, so in 2006, we developed an ArcPad application that actually merged that stuff together with a tablet in the field and a GPS camera and a survey rod. We collected a lot of information for our roads and culverts that we used in our modeling. As such, as we went through this process, we learned in 2008 it was going to be more effective for our models to be geo-referenced. The A-zone models that we created are also used the same process and were updated and actually created in most cases. And all those models that we've done as we've gone through this process, it's about 1,500 now, are posted on a website and available. Okay? So let's go back to the LiDAR. LiDAR is the plane flies over, it captures data down towards the earth, and it can't see under the roads and bridges. So in order to make a flood model, you actually have to go out in the field and collect that information. So what are the important parameters? The opening of the bridge, how much, the depth of the bridge, the girders and stuff like that, if there's any piers. So you would go through that information and you would add that to your LiDAR to add to the models. Also in 2006, we were still rolling from HEC 2 to HEC RAS, and HEC RAS wasn't georeferenced necessarily, and that's what paper space modeling looks like in HEC RAS. So we learned by cutting our cross-section, we were adding a georeferencing element to our models, so we went from paper spaced to georeferenced models in one step, all right? So our data in the field, the bridges, the topo that's cut from the LiDAR, is georeferenced tied to the Earth's surface, so the benefit is when we come back to the modeling at the end, it's tied to the Earth's surface for mapping, all right? It's kind of an example of this. This is a Baltimore County area that was a preliminary, a digital conversion. So the digital conversion areas are in blue, and as you go through the process and you see the yellow areas, that's where after we did the more detailed georeferencing models, we tied them back to the Earth's surface. Again, we're tied to the depth grids, we're tied to the other information, so as you add the depth grids, the cross-sections of that information, you can get an idea of how more robust the modeling is for that community. I said we had the bridge and culvert information georeferenced, so those are available, and they're tied to the structures that are on the ground. So if you look at the aerial imagery, you can't see the structure opening, but when you look at the bridge data, you get that information. The bridge data also has some data that ties the openings and the dimensions, and that's also available for the modelers. All right? So what you end up with is running your models and having that information. So what are some of the benefits that we had? Well, our state SHMO was very happy when we did this work. All right? 35 to 40% of Maryland is in an A zone, which meant it had a flood model or a floodplain, but no data for elevations. All right, so how does he help somebody with an elevation to pick up the house, to decide what the benefit costs are and stuff like that? That was one of our first benefits. Those water surface elevations that were calculated in the approximate A zones were also available for the first time in these communities as we rolled them out. They could use those for permits, building additions to set ground elevations, to set some standard for that person to build to without having to go out and pay for an engineer. All right? And our A-zone models have been submitted to FEMA, and they accepted them for LOMAS. All right? So we're considering a process now of taking that information from the model, from the GIS, from the map, and starting to fill out elevation certificates and kind of reduce errors. We're kind of in the middle of that. So as we go through this process, maybe 1 or 2 to 3 counties per year, after 8 or 10 years, we're now through the process where we have a data-consistent model process involved in the state of Maryland, and these are available sort of statewide. 22 of 24 will be done under the current mechanism under production, and counties 23 and 24 are partial counties. They have some information, they have some data. We just have to figure out how to kind of sneaker net their data from the process they use as either a local CTP into our process. Now I know that's, Maryland's 23 or 24 counties, that's a lot of information for me, but I'm sure some of you have, like watershed districts that are bigger than that. All right, so consider this maybe one of your portions of your districts, but either way, it's the same relative size and dimensions, okay? So there are even more benefits as we went through this process. We had better data, and we were learning what to do with it as we prepared the maps. So the maps, the modeling are prepared for FEMA, but they're used by the local community. The state's also picking up on some of that information because when we started this process even 5 years ago, our HAZUS runs and our HAZUS state plans that were submitted were also in paper format. So you had 2 different paper formats that you didn't use the data and information. Now, they're extrapolating the data directly from the models into HAZUS. So their HAZUS runs are not level 1 HAZUS where you're waiting for the computer to generate all your data. They're actually using the model from the floodplain studies. Their HAZUS models are level 2 or better in some cases, all right? That HAZUS run was completed by the state in the last couple of years. It's the lower costs, better time savings, and of course, the better results, all right? As we go through this process, more agencies are jumping on board and using some of our data. The Fish and Wildlife Service in Annapolis looked at our bridge data and realized they could use that for 2 things. They could use that to do a preliminary stream passage assessment to see what bridges they needed more attention to, bridges and culverts. And they even looked at our data for stream stability. So you have other partners out there that you might want to consider and kind of weave into this process. Our State Highway Administration, SHA, is using our data and some of their newer LiDAR products to actually do a road vulnerability. Again, 17 counties are adjacent to the Chesapeake Bay. They got to know what roads are going to be closed and how to evacuate, like a third of the population off the Chesapeake Bay and the eastern shore coasts, all right? And of course, we're looking at now e-collaboration, which is actually blending our floodplain permits, our waterway construction permits, our wetland permits, the joint permit applications with the Corps of Engineers into one sort of GIS process as we go through that and making this sort of stuff ring out. Our partners include the Critical Area Commission, Maryland Historic Trust, DNR, and the Corps of Engineers. So as we got to the point that we were turning this from a paper product to a digital product, we realized we had to do something to turn this into a way to distribute the data, all right? The mappings the mapping by county was changing. Like as you went through that process, they wanted to know what was coming to them and when, how they could get the information. So we developed an outreach site, and we call it mdfloodmaps.com, all right? We bought the domain name for .com, .org, and .net, so if you're picky or if you have a IT problem about, third-party issues, you can try all three of them. Some of those work well in Chrome. Some of those work, if you have Chrome and stuff like that. But this is a little hook to West Virginia, who we basically, begged, borrowed, or stole the information from to get this website started. They have a product. Kevin, is it West Virginia Flood Maps? West Virginia Flood Tool. All right. So we borrowed their code and started up our process. So we now have a data download of all those models, 1,500, and we have a GIS data integration with all the other stuff that's going through that process. This is relevant, I think, to this week because at yesterday's FEMA showcase, Rick said, and this was secondhand, I wasn't there, I'm sorry. Rick made the statement that wouldn't it be nice one day to click on a cross-section on a map and then be able to download a model? I'm paraphrasing, or something like that, but you'll get the point. So on our website, and you can little data issue between 1,200 data models on that slide and the 1,500 I just mentioned. It's 1,500, I checked this morning. You can go on our website, you can click on the right-hand side where it says download data, there's a circle. The little information tool on the top is an information tab, and you can see that the floodplains are on the map. On the left-hand side is an A-zone model. On the right-hand side is a detailed model. So the detailed model has BFEs that have to be published for FEMA. The A-zone model has cross-sections with water surface elevations. So at the local level, you can see that data is available, all right? And the models are posted. So if I click on the eye at the top of the map, there is a little green or, I guess, teal A along the stream for the A-zone model. If I left-click on that eye and left-click on that A, the geo-referenced HEC-RAS model for that stream downloads. That's a lot better than a Windows data structure directory that I think is currently being used by our national partners. All right? Those are the FEMA effective models. They're all posted on the website. So as far as innovative, we can now add timely and responsive to FEMA's request yesterday for this week's conference. There is now a way to download 1,500 models in the state of Maryland for FEMA and everyone else to use. So some of the other things that are innovative is that the website had to be retooled by our IT department, and I'm not an IT fan, but this is one case that it really worked to our advantage. There were about 35 different websites in the state of Maryland, and we all, like me, had our opinion of what it should look like and what it should be. They asked us to standardize them. I resisted and, gnashed my teeth, but it was the worst day of my life and the best day of my life in floodplain mapping, all right? Because now all our data incorporated or integrated with every other state data set, all right? This is a bomb. This is the like a mic drop moment. Now I can be on my website or our website for floodplain data. I'm sorry, that was kind of, selfish of me. The Maryland website, And on the Maryland website, I can bring in any other data set that's available on top of the same floodplain data. Up until this point, I would close that website and go look at another one and had a kind of, in my mental image of what was going on. So in this case, I've added the floodplains and the tax map parcels. So at the same time that someone calls me in a remote part of Western Maryland, I can open the map and click on the I button, the tax map parcels, then I go back to his parcel and click on where I think it is, and I can actually read who owns that property and what the address is. So this is kind of a, like an aha moment of actually finding information. Well, other data sets are also on there, and if we're going to talk about resiliency in probably some shape or form at the conference, you're going to want to know how the floodplain data relates to sea level rise and hurricane maps. In this case, the floodplain data stays on the map. I've now pulled in sea level rise that DNR did with that LiDAR data that we created 10 or 15 years ago, and that's a static data set. It's not for geoprocessing, but it's a view tool that I can go into a community now and explain to them about data and how their floodplains where their regulations stop are not necessarily the only thing they have to be aware about. They have to worry about, like sea level rise. Here's hurricane maps, same information, category 1, 2, 3, and 4, sea level rise and floodplains, and I pulled the floodplains back up to the top because at the coastal area you can see that the floodplain is definitely overwhelmed by those other two characteristics. All right? We added a carousel to the tool. I saw this on one of the other FEMA slides or FEMA presentations, and I think they did this in Region 6. The carousel we're going to use for mitigation and other opportunities when we get to those as we build them. So the library's been built. What's the next steps are, what are we going to use it for? All right? The floodplain models need to be updated. Every permit that comes into the state office, you've got to figure out how to integrate that back into the FEMA process. So we're going to give them the model to start the process. We're not going to let them come back in and give us a paper model. They're going to use their own paper space. We're going to ask them to start with the georeference model that we created through this process. We're going to update it. We're going to give them our local permit, and then we're going to require them to go back to FEMA for their elevations or their low letters of map amendment. All right? So we want to exchange that information. We want to keep that current, and we think this is the next innovative part of where we're going. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank you again for getting up this early, braving the weather, and understanding that the next part of innovation is what we all do next. All right? Thank you.